This was the summer of 2006. I was 22, living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, finishing up community college. My older sister had just had her first baby out in Lake Charles, about 3 hours west, and I'd been putting off visiting for weeks. Finally, in late June, I had 4 days off and no more excuses. I threw a bag in the back of my '98 Civic on a Friday night and set off around 9 p.m. I know how that sounds. Young woman, alone, driving at night on Louisiana back roads. Trust me, I was aware. I had had the conversation with myself 100 times about being more careful, more sensible. But it was a route I'd done before, and 3 hours felt manageable, and I just wanted to get there. I am not a car person. My dad tried to teach me basic maintenance in high school, and none of it stuck. I checked the gas, checked the tires when they looked obviously flat, and that was it. I'd had that Civic for 2 years, and it ran fine, and I never thought about it beyond that. About 2.5 hours in, maybe 30 miles east of Lake Charles, the car started feeling wrong. Just a slight shudder at first, like the engine hiccuped. I turned the radio down and listened. Smooth for a minute. Then it did it again, worse this time, like the car was losing power and then catching itself. I gripped the wheel and kept going and told myself, just get to Mel's house. It didn't make it to Mel's house. The shuddering got worse over the next few minutes, and then the engine just gave up. No drama, no explosion. It simply stopped catching, and I coasted onto the shoulder in the dark with my hazards going and sat there. I tried restarting it. Nothing. So I did what anyone who knows nothing about cars does. I got out and opened the bonnet. I stood there in the dark Louisiana heat, staring at the engine like something was going to announce itself. There was thin smoke coming from around one of the cylindrical things screwed into the top of the engine. One of them was sitting noticeably looser than the others, tilted slightly, and the area around it was dark and oily. I reached in without thinking, burned my fingers immediately, swore at nobody, and used my hoodie sleeve to grip it properly. It came out way too easily. I turned it over in my hands, not really knowing what I was looking at. It looked important. I figured if I showed it to whoever helped me, they'd understand what went wrong, so I wrapped it in a tissue from my bag and put it in the front pocket of my jeans. Then I looked up and took in my actual situation. Empty highway in both directions. Flat, scrubby Louisiana landscape on both sides. No buildings, no lights, no exits that I could see. I flipped open my phone and held it up. No signal. Not one bar. I tried my sister anyway and got nothing, not even a ring. I tried walking up and down the shoulder, holding the phone above my head like an idiot. Still nothing. So I stood there with my hazards blinking in the dark and waited for a car I could flag down. For the first 20 minutes, there was occasional traffic, trucks mostly, a couple of SUVs. Nobody stopped. I started waving more deliberately, and a few people slowed and then kept going. One truck driver honked. After about 45 minutes, the traffic had thinned to almost nothing, and I was running low on water and really starting to feel the situation for what it was. A 22-year-old woman, alone on a Louisiana highway at night with a dead car and no way to contact anyone. I was trying not to let my mind go to the obvious places, but it kept going there anyway. Then headlights appeared and slowed down. Older model sedan, dark-colored, beat up around the edges. It pulled onto the shoulder ahead of me and stopped. The window came down as I reached it. The driver was maybe mid-30s, heavy-set, plain gray T-shirt, this flat expression that wasn't hostile but wasn't warm either. He asked where I was headed. I told him Lake Charles. He said he was going that direction, and I could ride with him if I wanted. Every instinct I had was telling me to think carefully about this. I'm a young woman alone on a dark highway at night, and this is a stranger's car, and I know all the reasons this is a bad idea. I stood there for probably 3 seconds, running through my options. I had none. I got in. The first few minutes were fine. He asked how long I'd been stuck out there. I told him. He said that's rough, and went quiet. I filled the silence by mentioning the spark plug, showing him the tissue from my pocket, and explaining it seemed to have come loose. He glanced at it and said, "Yeah, that'll do it," and went back to watching the road. I put it back in my pocket and told myself this was going to be fine. Just a quiet guy giving someone a lift. Stop overthinking it. We'd been driving maybe 5 or 6 minutes when he said, completely out of nowhere, and in the same tone you'd use to mention the weather, that he'd always been fascinated by gore. I looked at him. He was watching the road. Calm face. Like he hadn't said anything unusual at all. I said something like, "Sorry?" And he repeated it. Said he found it quite interesting, and asked whether I was interested in that type of stuff, the way bodies worked and what happened when they stopped. I laughed slightly, the kind of laugh you do when you don't know what else to do, and turned to look out the window, hoping the conversation would just move on. It didn't. A couple of minutes later, he kept on ranting, that he thought it was a shame that murder was illegal. Just like that. No punchline, no context. He said the legal consequences were really the only thing stopping most people, and he sometimes wondered what things would look like without them. I stopped responding. I was staring at the road ahead and running through options and trying not to let anything show on my face. I told myself he was just weird. One of those guys who says provocative things to get a reaction. That's all this was. I almost had myself convinced. Then he said, "I mean, for example, I could kill you right now, and no one would know. But I have no reason to, so you're in safe hands for now." Same flat tone, still watching the road, like he just mentioned he could take a different exit, but wasn't going to. I said nothing. I kept my face completely still and stared straight ahead and focused on breathing normally. A few minutes of silence passed. I was watching the road signs, tracking where we were, holding on to any geographic detail I could. Then a sign came up, Lake Charles, right at the junction ahead. He went left. I asked where he was going. He said he needed to make a quick stop first, but he wouldn't be too long. His hand moved to the center console, and he placed a mini dagger on his thigh and began playing with it, as if it was another attempt to intimidate me. I sat very still and looked at the road. He drove for another 15 minutes down roads that got progressively smaller and more neglected. Old chain-link fences, overgrown lots, buildings that had the look of somewhere nobody official ever bothered with. He turned into what looked like a half-finished housing estate. Cracked concrete, patchy dead grass, a cluster of low houses with lights on inside. A handful of men standing near one of them who turned and looked as we pulled up. He parked, pocketed the knife, and got out without saying anything to me. He walked toward the men, and they closed together and started talking quietly. I tried the door immediately. Child locked, both sides. I tried the window knob. Nothing. I went through the glove compartment, papers and a lighter, and nothing useful. I checked under the seat with my hand, but again there was nothing. I glanced back at the man. He was maybe 40 meters away, clearly in the midst of a drug deal. I put my bag strap across my body, took the spark plug out of my jeans pocket. I'd been carrying it for 3 hours. I remembered something my dad had mentioned once, years ago, that the ceramic on a spark plug would shatter car glass easily. So I gripped the plug in my fist with the ceramic tip pointing outward, aimed at the bottom corner of the passenger window, and hit it as hard as I could. The window went. One impact and it just collapsed inward, and the alarm went off at exactly the same moment, loud and immediate, and I was already moving. Pushing the remaining glass out with my small bag, reaching through to the exterior handle, getting out onto the cracked concrete, and running before I'd even fully registered that I was out of the car. Behind me, I heard loud shouting. I went between the buildings, hit a chain-link fence at full speed, got over it somehow, and kept running. Into a field, low grass, dark in every direction. The shouting was getting closer. Flashlight beams cutting across the field behind me, spreading out, multiple men. I dropped flat into the grass and pressed my face against the ground and stopped moving entirely. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my throat. The lights swept over me twice. The grass was just tall enough. They searched for what felt like a long time, voices calling to each other, flashlights arcing back and forth. Then, gradually, further away. Then, nothing. I lay in that field for another 20 minutes before I trusted myself to move. Then I got up and walked in what I figured was roughly the direction of a main road, using a faint glow of lights somewhere in the distance as my guide. It took close to an hour where I felt like it was safe enough. I stood on the verge in the dark with my bag and my shaking hands and thought about what I'd just done. And then I thought about the long walk I had ahead of me, as I had no clue where I was now, when headlights appeared of another car. It pulled over to the side and lowered the windows. The car that stopped was a beige Buick. The couple inside were probably in their late 60s. The woman immediately asked if I was all right. I said I'd had some car trouble and whether they could take me to a nearby towing garage or help station. The man said of course, and the woman handed me a water bottle from a bag at her feet without being asked. I sat in the back of that Buick and watched the dark Louisiana highway go past the window and tried to figure out how to explain any of this to my sister when I got there. It's been a long time since this happened, but I still wonder what may have happened had I not escaped from that car. I don't really have a scary story in the traditional sense. Nothing happened to me directly. But I witnessed something on a drive through Montana 3 years ago that I think about every single time I see someone standing on the side of a road with their thumb out. I was driving up from Billings, heading north on a state route, one of those long, empty Montana highways that just goes and goes, with nothing on either side except flat, scrubby grassland and the occasional fence line. I'd been on the road about 2 hours, and there was basically no traffic. Just me and occasionally a truck going the other direction. That kind of drive where you set the cruise control and zone out and just exist for a while. About an hour outside of my destination, I came up behind another car, dark blue pickup, older model, going roughly the same speed as me. We were the only two vehicles on that stretch of road, so we just ended up traveling together in that way you sometimes do on empty highways, a comfortable distance apart, neither of us trying to overtake. Maybe 20 minutes after I first noticed him, I came around a long curve and saw the roadworks, temporary traffic lights, single lane ahead, a guy in a high-vis jacket holding a stop sign. The blue pickup rolled through on the green, and I came up to the light just as it flipped red. By the time I got the green again, the pickup was maybe half a mile ahead of me. That's when I saw the hitchhiker. She was standing on the shoulder about a mile up. Even from that distance, something about her looked rough, disheveled, the kind of person who hasn't had anywhere to be for a while. The blue pickup slowed as it reached her and stopped. I watched her get in from half a mile back. I caught back up to the pickup within a few minutes of clearing the roadworks. They were back up to highway speed and everything looked completely normal. Just a truck driving north with 2 people in it. I settled back into my lane behind them and thought nothing more of it. About 10 or 12 minutes later, the pickup started drifting, just slightly at first, edging toward the shoulder and then correcting. I sat up a little straighter and watched it. Then it drifted the other way, toward the center line, then back. I backed off, gave them more room, figured maybe the driver was tired or distracted. Then the brake lights flashed on and off a few times, and the truck lurched, and I could see through the rear window that there was movement in the cab. Not normal movement. Both figures shifting around, the truck swerving left and right in response. Something was happening inside that vehicle. I put my hazards on and slowed right down. The truck was fully across the center line now, then back, then swinging hard left. And before I could even fully process what I was watching, it left the road completely and went down into the ditch on the left side with a horrible flat impact that I felt more than heard. I pulled over and got out and ran toward it. The truck had gone nose first into the ditch, front end buried, rear wheel still on the embankment. Steam coming from somewhere under the bonnet. As I got close, the passenger door flew open and a rough-looking woman scrambled out. She was screaming like a madman. Not words, just this raw, frantic sound, clutching a purse to her chest, hair all over the place, clothes dirty and worn. She looked like someone who had been through a hell of a day. She saw me, and for 1 second we made direct eye contact, and then she turned and ran into the field on the other side of the road and didn't look back. I watched her momentarily, confused by the random outburst, before I went to the driver's side. The door was jammed from the impact, so I wrenched it open, and the driver more or less fell out. Middle-aged guy, baseball cap, bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow, but conscious and breathing, and more shaken than seriously hurt. I got him up to the shoulder and sat him down, and he put his head in his hands. When he could speak, he told me what happened. He said she'd seemed completely fine when he picked her up. Said she needed to get to the next town. Normal enough conversation for a few minutes. Then she asked him for money. He said he didn't have cash on him. She offered him something more personal in return, and made it pretty clear what she meant. He said no again. She asked again, more insistent. He said no one final time, and told her he'd just take her to town, but that was it. That's when she apparently grabbed the wheel. No warning, no escalation, just reached across with both hands and yanked it toward her. By the time he was fighting her for control, they were already going off the road. That's the bit I saw when I was behind them. I stayed with him until the state troopers arrived about 20 minutes later. He gave his statement, and I gave mine. They went into the field to look for her, but the grassland out there goes for miles. She was gone. I've thought about that a lot since, about his version of events and whether I believed it, about the fact that she was screaming when she got out of that car, about the way she looked at me in that 1 second before she ran. Here's what I keep coming back to. If she was genuinely in danger, if the driver was the problem and not her, she had a clear moment where she could have asked me for help. I was right there. She saw me. Instead, she ran straight into that field and disappeared. But then again, if you've been through enough, if you've learned through enough bad experiences that strangers don't help, that asking for help makes things worse, that the safest thing is always to run, maybe that's exactly what you'd do, even when someone safe was standing right in front of you. I don't know whose version of events was true. I only heard one of them. What I do know is that I haven't stopped to help a hitchhiker since, and I'm genuinely not sure whether that's the right lesson to have taken from it. But I'd rather not take the risk. This was about 8 years ago. Me and 3 friends, Ryan, Cal, and a guy we called Moose, had planned a canoe trip through the Yukon in Canada. We were heading from Whitehorse out toward Watson Lake along the Alaska Highway, roughly a few hours' drive, where we'd stashed our canoes and supplies. The plan was to hitch out rather than walk overnight, which up there is completely normal. You stick your thumb out and eventually someone stops. We started walking around 5 in the afternoon. A couple of hours in, with no luck, we'd pretty much accepted we were walking the whole way, when a minivan slowed down and pulled over. The driver leaned across and told us to get in. She was a woman, maybe around 30, alone in the middle of nowhere, which was a bit strange, but nothing out of the ordinary. A solo woman pulling over for a group of young guys on a remote Canadian highway isn't something you usually see, but we weren't about to say no. We piled in and she started talking before we'd even closed the doors. She didn't stop for the next hour. The topics bounced around in a way that was hard to follow. How wonderful we were. How she was heading to visit relatives. Alaska came up a few times, which made sense given we were on the Alaska Highway. She said she was planning to cross over eventually. And then, almost as a side note, she mentioned the RCMP had been after her for a while. Said it with a laugh and moved on before any of us could respond. She had badly arthritic hands and kept reaching over to touch Ryan's shoulder. Ryan was in the front seat and sat very still the entire time. I watched from the back as her hand moved from his shoulder to his knee and back again, and I made eye contact with Cal next to me, and neither of us said a word. At some point, she mentioned her son, said he'd been a lot of trouble for a long time, then said he wasn't any trouble now. Same nervous smile, then straight on to the next topic. I sat with that phrasing for the rest of the ride. The back of the van was packed with luggage, nice luggage, matching suitcases, expensive ones, stacked carefully floor to ceiling, which didn't fit with her at all. Her clothes were unkempt, her hair unwashed. She looked like she'd been living out of that van for weeks, but the suitcases were pristine. And there was a smell. It hit you if you breathed in too deeply. Sweet and wrong, and underneath everything else in that van. We didn't say anything about it at the time. None of us acknowledged it. But we'd all noticed it. I know we had because of what Ryan said later. She got us to our drop point and we climbed out. One of our camp members invited her for stew out of kindness, but Ryan jumped in immediately. Said she had to get going. Alaska. Not much stew anyway. She accepted this, called us sweet kids, and then drove off. We watched the van disappear. Ryan turned around and without any preamble said, "Did anyone else smell that van?" Nobody had to answer. We loaded the bear gun and talked about leaving that night, but eventually decided to stay and get some sleep. We'd be up early and gone before light. The woman was heading to Alaska. She wasn't coming back down this road. I woke up at some point in the early hours to the sound of an engine. I lay completely still and listened. The engine slowed, then stopped, somewhere on the road above our camp. I reached over and touched Cal's arm, and he was already awake, already listening. Nobody moved for a long time. Then we heard a car door. One door opening and closing quietly. Then footsteps on the gravel above, slow ones, moving along the road in the direction of our camp, then stopping. We lay there in total silence for what felt like a very long time. The footsteps didn't come any further. No voice, no flashlight, nothing. Just the sound of someone standing on the road above our camp in the middle of the night, not moving. Eventually, we heard the car door again. The engine started, and it drove away. We were packed and on the water before sunrise, and nobody brought it up for the first hour on the canoes. Then Moose said he didn't think she was going to Alaska. None of us did. We still talk about the smell sometimes, about the abnormal amount of suitcases in the back, about what exactly she meant when she said her son wasn't any trouble anymore. We've never really landed on an answer. that we were comfortable with.